Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy Women's History Month. My name is Katari Villanueva. I am one of the co-leads for Heritage of Latinx Alliance Employees Resource Group, alongside Sean Lee and Frank Pabon. It is my pleasure and my honor to actually be able to present our special guest today for a special Women's History Month panel. She is somebody that I grew up with, so I'm super excited to hear of your journey from Williamsburg, Brooklyn. She is the New York City former council member and the first Dominican American woman elected to public office in New York State. Before I continue, I just want to give a quick reminder. This is a webinar. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will be getting to those questions at the 45-minute mark as we get close. I myself have a few questions for Diana, but without further ado, I don't want to talk too much because I want to hear about you and your journey and how it all began. So Diana, welcome.
Thank you so much, Katari. I am so thrilled to be able to join you. Thank you so much to HOLA for the invitation to be with you all. This is a fantastic month, obviously, for women throughout the world to be able to celebrate one another, to lift one another, to share with one another. And I know that we are joined by a diverse group of individuals from the Mount Sinai family. And I just wanted to say hola to HOLA. And as Katari had mentioned, I served in the city council for 12 years. I served as a deputy Brooklyn Borough president to Eric Adams when he was borough president for 4 years. Previous to going into an elected position, an appointed position, I was a chief of staff to an assemblyman. And it's how I got started as an intern while I was in college. I was inspired since I was a little girl to go into the healthcare network. Can you imagine? Life has taken me in circles to a career that I never expected. The opportunities to reflect on that career have really brought me joy, and I've so much so that I've felt I brought what was a healing process to my community. Growing up, as Katari had mentioned, in Los Sures, Williamsburg was not easy in the 70s and 80s. And the opportunity to be able to rebuild our community. My mom and my dad came from the Dominican Republic. They settled in Williamsburg, in Los Sures, South 5th Street. The opportunity to work the factories. My mom was a seamstress. She was on the sample floor division. If anybody is familiar with the textile industry, that's a prestigious area to work in. You're one of the finer seamstress sample makers, right? And so she was very proud of her career and would share stories with us. And she worked in what is today's Soho. Back then, it was Broadway Lafayette. And, you know, the factories of Williamsburg, making anywhere from women's suits to men's suits to hats. We had it all in what were walking distances, 10-minute walking distances for people to work. Heavy migration from the Dominican Republic in the 80s, but my mom came in 1965. So she's been living in New York longer than she's ever lived in Dominican Republic. I get very emotional speaking about my mom. She's today 87 years old. And I think she's one of the primary reasons. I can certainly say that my leadership has developed into a skill set that I learned at a very early age. My dad was a livery driver. He was one of 20 shareholders, built a livery base with his colleagues in Williamsburg. And if you remember, yellow cabs never came to Brooklyn. And so we heavily depended in our communities of color on the livery system, 45,000 strong drivers out there. Today, it's a very different story, right? But these are all, areas of focus in my life that I have been exposed to through my parents, right? Their trials and tribulations to be able to better serve my community. I went to school for nursing, and my last year, I was compelled through this internship at the local assemblyman's office through a friend who recommended I apply, and the rest is history. I just needed to continue to serve my community in a way where I saw power in the work, right? Transformative conversations that led to action. It was invigorating, and you saw what was the impact, the opportunity to be able to help individuals at a time, or have mass greater changes that impacted the masses of a community. So I don't want to continue speaking because I know that Katari has so much more to ask.
I do. So you mentioned that your goal career was actually in the medical industry, right? So
Yes.
who inspired you to actually be a leader in the politics, and why?
My nursing professor, God bless her wherever she is, in that final year said, I was organizing our students, student peers in the nursing department to be able to build what was called SNAP, it's Student Nurses at Pace. And that became an organization where we could lean on one another, fundraise for our organization. I revamped that organization because they had defunct. And as I was doing so, I was very deeply tied to this organization that the nursing professor said, you have these leadership skills that you should really go back and explore. And I took it as discouragement because this was my life dream, to be able to become a nurse. And can you imagine going back to Latino parents and telling them, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do nursing anymore? That was not part of the plan. But, in life, you have to learn how to pivot and be able to lean in to what could be perspectives that you're not necessarily getting from your loved ones. And I'm so grateful that I was able to listen to that advice. And that led to what was the encouragement of asking for opportunity to see what that really meant. Because one thing is to have leadership skills, but it's another to actually apply them and see your work develop. So it was a natural fit. And I did not like politics. I was not interested in politics. I didn't study political science. And word of advice, it's not necessary to study political science if you want to get into politics. My greatest strength, I think, is my nursing background. Although I didn't take my NCLEX, didn't, finish what would be the nursing program, I ended up applying a lot of my ethics in science, in nursing, to my district, working in systems, deconstructing to reconstruct. Our government is based on systems, regulations, very cumbersome rules, and navigating that is very difficult for your average person. More than likely, if I asked any one person on this webinar, do you know your council member? And after you answer that, when was the last time you touched base with them? So that's homework.
That is. And, I'm pretty sure that working in politics and in this line of business is not easy, right? There are a lot of challenges and there are a lot of things that you face, which leads me to my next question. Have you faced any barriers in your career due to being a woman, better yet, a Latina woman And if so, how did you overcome those barriers?
I think there is always a moment that we as women can point to. And early in my career, I remember, I was 20, I celebrated my 21st birthday in the assemblyman's office, right? I was very young, Latina. It's very difficult because, you're working in an environment where it was dominated by men, a lot of female staffing. And how do you break ground so that you establish respect, so that you establish what is a voice at the table? And I had what was great mentorship. The assemblyman was very supportive in making sure that I was always at the table with him. When we were meeting with deputy mayors and commissioners, um, you know, the bandwidth to be able to challenge an agency, ask questions, right? How often do we sit there as women and meek about asking and feeling the lack of confidence to be able to ask a question if you're not understanding something or you're curious about something, right? In this business, it's all about curiosity and being able to ask those questions, especially the tough ones, because when you're trying to look under the hood of a car, you're not going to like what you see, and people want to claim it's a good car, right? And so you have to make sure those cables are what your car needs. And the only way to really validate it is to be able to inspect it and be able to make the changes you need in order to have what is the results of what you're looking to get. And so in politics, I reversed engineered everything. And I recall one time there was a reporter who came to visit with the assemblyman. I was the chief of staff, and he wanted to circumvent my role and go straight to the assemblyman. And I had to stand up to him and say to him, you're not allowed to come in here, right? And disrespected, to say the least. The assemblyman, gave him a lashing. And the next day, this gentleman sends me a bouquet of flowers, right? Not necessarily the apology that I needed, but I accepted it. My first day in the council, I was walking with my colleagues. We were walking in through the security booth, and the security guard stopped me, not my colleagues in front of me, and said, oh, who do you work for? And I said, what council member are you with? And I said, I am the council member. So, again, taken aback. Now you have to understand, when I took office, I was 27 years old, and it was right after 9/11. And I was entering a council that was elected after the first term limits law go into effect. And what that means is that you have a whole new council. So we went from an average age of 72 years old to the average age of 35. And to see what is a council of 51 members coming at the city with all these ideas and fresh attitude, and apathy was not welcomed, right? This was about changing the system, challenging the system, developing and making sure that we were creating opportunities, right? Talking about what are the elements of each of our districts that are most important, and finding common ground. So we had a great 12 years, right? They were challenging, and they were, at the time we had, when I first started, 12 women. We worked to support, we had a women's caucus, so we built what was a voice platform for ourselves within the council, and nobody messed around with us. And by the 12th year, we had 18 women, right, supporting women. And then I became part of a structure called 21 and 21 to elect 21 women in the year 2021 to continue to support women beyond my elected life. Some of my colleagues were part of this, founded this organization. And, today we're the majority in the council. Women are 2/3, 3/4 probably by now, running in the council, running the city of New York. And so, we've come a long way.
Yeah, that is actually coming a long way. Was there ever a moment where you felt like so discouraged throughout your journey, or in the beginning of your journey where you just wanted to give up?
Mm. I used to say, Katari, this is like a life sentence. I don't know when it's going to end. And pushing myself because I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing this for my community. And I needed to make sure that I would get up in the morning. I was single when I started, but dating. And it's hard to see women have successful relationships when you're in politics. They would always tease me that I was one of the lucky ones because my husband, who was in law enforcement, he's now retired. We grew up together in the neighborhood, and he's my life partner. And without him, I would not have been able to deal with what is a very pressing profession, right? This is not a part-time job. When you're representing people, you're representing them 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They are coming to you with crisis. You also have to deliver on your district, right? So services have to be managed, potholes have to be filled, right? It's the city that never sleeps for a reason, right? And so you don't sleep. And the opportunity to be, and I'm not saying that everybody works that way. I'm just letting you know my expectations of myself and my staff. And the opportunity to be able to find some solace, I would go into my car and just let it all out, right? Find some peace and quiet to turn myself off. To be able to find myself as the years went by. Now I have a husband. I have two little kids. I was dropping off, and he was picking up because my schedule was never secured during the evening. And so 9 times out of 10, I was coming home by 11 o'clock at night, having left at 6 in the morning already, and dropping off the kids. And that was my time with them. Those were the harder days where, you question, is this all worth it, right? And then you'd see them and you're like, this is for them, the next generation. The opportunity to be able to receive a thank you every now and then, the love that my community poured into me. As the years went by, the election cycles that I would have, the margin would get smaller and smaller. I was the only woman when I ran in 2001. I beat 4 men. And 2 years later, I had to run again because it was redistricting. The lines changed. And again, I was the only woman. 4 men again. Then I had to run again in 4 years. This time it was a battle. And it was a battle because my mentor became my nemesis. And straight out of a movie, we were at war. And that really was unsettling, disappointing. But you have to rebuild, and you don't look back. And there was no option. And I did not only have what was, him against me, I had the whole Brooklyn Democratic Organization against me because he was the chairman of the Democratic Organization. And the opportunity to be able to, line up volunteers. There was so much division. Everybody was talking about this race. All eyes were on this race. I beat the machine. That was unheard of. And I did it based on my track record, my work, my results. my commitment to community, and being able to be level-headed, being able to have people understand that I won't be there forever. And, people have to be involved if they want to see the government that will shape our city, right? The opportunity to be able to finish my term in my last 4 years, it was like a restart button. And we were able to finalize, there's an application right now for senior housing in Bushwick. That was one of the last projects 10 years ago that I had secured. It just got built. It's just being marketed. That's how long things take in government. And that's what you're trying to fix on a constant basis. Had I been there still, that I would not have allowed 10 years to go by. People can't wait 10 years for housing, affordable housing, especially seniors.
Yeah, that is something, and that's very touching, right? Because a lot of it has to do with our seniors, and having to see them go through those moments is very difficult. I mean, we have our family members, right? We have our mom, our parents, our grandparents, if we still have them alive, and to have them, see them go through something like that, it's very painful. And so we thank you for everything that you have done thus far for our seniors. I know I've seen it, but how do you now encourage women of today, right, not to give up, whether it's in politics or whether it's any other career that they're trying to, pursue and push? How do you encourage them not to give up? Sometimes we feel like we don't have a voice, or sometimes we feel like, oh, we're not good enough to sit in those tables. But yet again, it's ourselves that we stop ourselves from actually sitting in those tables, right? How do you encourage the women of today not to give up?
Don't take no for an answer. The opportunities to be able to, if there's not a seat at the table, bring one with you, as Shirley Chisholm used to say, right? The opportunities to lean in and over or into rather another woman, right, of success, so that you rely on what is a certain level of observation, right? I'm not saying you're becoming that person, but see what it is that they do to measure success. And success to me may be different for you, right? At this point in my life, I'm trying to slow down because I want to be there for my mom, who's already 87. I want to be there for my teenage boys who don't want anything to do with me, right? And so these are choices we are making, right? We have an opportunity here to be able to, as women, find moments, right, where you may have always wanted to do something. What's stopping you, right? I always wanted to have my own business. I'm doing that. It's a lot of work, but I'm doing it for me, my family. It's a way I remain active without the craziness of politics. Bring women together, right? At a coffee shop, right? We spend a lot of time at the hair salon. You'd be surprised how much you learn at the hair salon while you're waiting 3 hours. Share events that are coming up that may not be on your radar screen. Be supportive in a way that's not envious. And, check your personality at the door, right? It's important that we bring our full self without trying to walk all over someone else, right? Women can be detrimental to one another. Just with the look of, as they say, clocking from head to toe, not necessary. And perhaps it's not meant that way, and it's just a way of admiring the person, but interpret it the wrong way, right? And so we want to be able to build structures that are healthy for us, and only we can build that for us. Um, I just happened to support one of the most recent women elected into the council, Susan Schwang from uh, South Brooklyn. And, you know, having someone to talk to be able to give her, some insight, to be there for her, right? It, it, it can be something as small as a conversation. And so, you know, having a webinar like this, Katari, I feel like you supported me by giving me the opportunity to share my story, right? To be able to have a captivating audience. And hopefully we pass that along to the next person.
For sure. I mean, I think it's very important that women empower other women. I mean, there's room for everyone, right? It's just like you mentioned before, it's very important to share. It's very important to network, right? To get to know one another on different levels. Because that's how we learn from each other. But you know, we have to put in the work. And I think that's the important key. It's that we put in the work to actually do it. You know, we can't sit here and complain and then nothing gets done, but we're not making any moves, right? So that's very powerful, Diana. Um, Now, my next question to you is, I know when you were in council, the voting, doing the campaigns, being a mom, being a wife. How did you balance your career, your personal life, and even your passions? How did you balance all of that?
I think there's a misnomer that there's balance. I think it's a juggling act that we all do, and we want to call it balance. Um, I would I always make time, right? When I'm speaking with someone, my staff, I would drive my staff nuts because I didn't believe in time. Um, I would be speaking with a person from the community, and I am focused on them. I'm looking at their eyes and I'm hearing them, right? I'm not just, I'm actively listening, right? And that requires time. I make time for what is important. My community was important, from one individual to a town hall meeting. It's equally important to me. My time with my kids and being able to take them to see the Statue of Liberty on a ferry ride. Even though we didn't get off, we were making time. Um, Time to spend with my husband, having dinner together alone, right? Being able to have dinner with my colleagues, right? We would have these, and I miss those. We would have these organized dinners once a month, where we would go out and into each other's districts. And that gave us the opportunity to get to know one another outside of City Hall, and our spouses, our partners, you know, to be able to be human.
That is for sure. We have to remember that we are people.
Mm-hmm.
We are human. And so we have to know how to divide our time, make time. I saw in the comments, Sean said, repeat that, Diana, make time, right? And I think sometimes we fail to do that. We get all worked up, we get all caught up, and we forget to actually take that moment to say, you know what? All right, I need to go, walk by the water, or, go to the park, go to the track, do something that, you can unwind, that you can refresh and reflect. And sometimes we just work ourselves up. So it
Oh,
is
absolutely.
important that we actually do make time for ourselves, um, and pamper ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's right. And you have to be okay with being uncomfortable.
Yes. Oh, you want to talk a little bit about that? That's very important. I think a lot of us need to hear that, because sometimes we don't like being shaken. We don't like being in uncomfortable situations, or uncomfortable places, but sometimes that's what we have to do, right? In order to get to where we want to get to, we have to be uncomfortable. You want to talk a little bit about that?
That's where my butterflies start fluttering. And, being comfortable with being uncomfortable really elevates us to a higher degree. And, public speaking isn't easy. And we are able to do so when we relinquish ourselves into it, right? Where, so you stumbled over a word, or you happened to forget a sentence, or you were ad-libbing and you were off topic, right? It doesn't matter, because you are delivering your full human being. And the opportunities to be able to express what that is, right? I recall having a hearing where I chaired the small business committee, and my speaker at the time, Christine Quinn, joined me, and we were characterized in the front page of the New York Post the next day as clowns. And it was just their way of patronizing us for having this hearing that allowed for unions to come in and express they didn't want a particular retail store to come into the city of New York. And in this business, you're opening a dialogue. We have come to a point where if you're not agreeing, then you're the enemy. And that's what's wrong right now in our nation. I should feel comfortable enough to have an uncomfortable conversation, to be able to listen, actively listen, and truly deconstruct to reconstruct so that we have a better outcome, right? Because nothing is perfect.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is perfect. We're not perfect, right? We have our faults, we have our failures, but we learn from them. And as long as we acknowledge that and we correct that, that's the important thing. I think that a lot of us just sometimes don't even try because we don't want to fail, right? But you're not going to know unless you try. You mentioned something about public speaking wasn't your greatest thing. It wasn't mine either, right? I mean, even doing it today was kind of like, oh my God, nerve-wracking. And then I'm like, wait a minute, it's Diana. How am I going to be nervous? But you still get that way. You know what I mean?
Right.
But you have to be in those uncomfortable situations when you have a vision, when you have a mission, right? And you have to be able to speak. You don't know who needs to listen to your story. You don't know who needs that encouragement, that motivation. And you're the person that, are chosen to do that. And I think that sometimes we just think very little of ourselves. And we put ourselves in a small box. And then we're watching everybody else grow and everybody else rise, but we're afraid to do it. And I think that if we put ourselves in those uncomfortable situations, even if we don't want to do it and push ourselves to do it, we will reach so much more as women.
Here. Like, that is exactly how success occurs.
Yeah.
And I love the way Jason commented, we have lost the ability to disagree. If you're in a space where you can't disagree, then that space is no longer safe.
Right. Right. I do have a question in here before I go to my next question. What advice can you offer men? Who are looking for ways to show true allyship and support towards equity initiatives for women?
I think there's always an opportunity for a peer of the opposite gender to be able to call out, let's say in a meeting, Katari is sitting across from Sean, and Sean has been talking away. Don't mansplain, right? But lean into Katari, who's sitting right across from you, to say, Katari, what do you think? And pulling Katari into that conversation, right? We need to pull in women's opinions into these conversations. And it's the opportunity to be able to see the person in the room who doesn't want to be seen.
I hope that answers your question, John. Okay, it's a perfect. All right, so I'm gonna go into my next question, and it's my last question before we go into the Q&A. Is there any specific or special projects that you have in the works right now that you would like to share with us? And if so,
So
what are those projects?
I appreciate that. There's actually a passion project in Los Sures that I had been working towards at the tail end of my career in politics as a council member. I commissioned a study to deck over the trench of the BQE. So if you notice in Williamsburg, we have the BQE over us and we have the BQE under us, which is why we are one of, as well as the subway system, right? That runs bifurcating our community in all sorts of ways. We also have the Williamsburg Bridge. And so we have a heavily polluted community and the opportunities to be with very little open space, active open space, because you have what is considered passive and active. Passive would be a garden, you know, a promenade where you could walk. Active would be a baseball field, right? A place where you could go barbecue. We wanted to see what was this gaping hole dividing our community, the south side, east and west of Williamsburg, unified. When I was growing up, I don't know if you remember, Katari, these issues, but we had gang fights. You know, you couldn't cross over to the other side and vice versa. We're talking about deadly grounds if you did. And that comes from territory, right? And if you can envision mending that scar to bridge community, now you're creating what is the landscape of one community, therefore lessening this territorial attitude towards a community. And so we want to be able to support this plan. We have pressed what would be the state, the city, federal government. Thank God, you know, the borough president, Antonio Reynoso, who used to be my chief of staff, first Latino to be elected to borough president. I'm very proud of him. You know, the gift of mentorship is super important, to be able to have, you know, him continue the legacy of this project, to support it and see it through. He's been able to actively work with the mayor's office and the governor's office to submit a grant application for that particular project to continue, right? Because the numbers now are very different than they were, you know, a dozen years ago. We're talking about, you know, $100 million to just deck what was the area in the South Side. Today, all of Brooklyn is talking about decking the whole tunneling, what would be the whole Brooklyn Queens Expressway, right? And because the promenade, the cantilever, as they call it, the triple cantilever, as you go through the Brooklyn Heights community, it runs along the waterfront with open space by the Brooklyn Bridge Park. They have an opportunity of funds that were secured to rebuild the promenade because it wasn't intended to have as many vehicles as it does today, especially truck traffic on those lanes. And so, you know, $5 billion have been secured for that little area. And our point is, this can take care of more than just one community.
Wow, that's really good to hear that Antonio, which I know as well. He actually worked in PS 18, that project, which he finished as well, for the public school when my daughter was actually at that school. So it's good that he's going to continue, this project. That's awesome. That's great. I am going to turn it over for the Q&A now. But if you want to share your email address or anything that you would like to share in the chat, feel free to do so in case anyone has any further questions after after this webinar, that they can actually reach you.
I am going to add my email address.
Yes. All right. And so now I'm going to turn it into the Q&A. So we do have some questions here. So the first question we have from Shireen. What would you say was the biggest accomplishment in your role for your community?
Gosh, I want to say I dedicated myself to increasing our voter base by through education, right? I used to engage my district with 5 different town hall meetings a month, not a year, a month. And it was divided into areas because what Williamsburg South Side community needed may have been different than Bushwick South, which had more homeowners than tenants. And so you want to really capture what are the areas of focus and interests that pertain to small niche groups. We were able to successfully represent what were needs of each of those sector areas. Similar to how a precinct has different sectors. You have Sector Eddie, you have Sector Andrew, right? I had different sectors in my council district that would allow for them to have a one-on-one with me. We would have meetings that could draw anywhere between 100 people to 500 people a month in each of those meetings. Through that communication, in person, building relationship, really strong ties to their elected official is how I did my best work. And being able to analyze where the patterns were, right? One community member may say, I have an issue on my block with illegal dumping of garbage. And then somebody else will chime in and say, you know what, I've been seeing our tree pits full of garbage this week. Or we don't have trees at all, right? These are the types of issues that if unaddressed, then what are you doing as an elected official? And perhaps as participants of this webinar, you don't even know that you have access and rights to ask for these things through your elected officials. So being able to have that dialogue, I think, is the greatest achievement, because you get to address real needs, real problems, and have real impact.
On your community.
Action. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Shireen. We have another question.
Participate by actively seeking your council member if you haven't already.
The next question is, what was one of your proudest projects during your time as a council member? And what was a lesson you learned taking on the goal to achieve it?
So I have to go back to 2005. There's plenty to say. But we were able to, let me preface this by saying, when I first started, in my first 2 years, I dedicated funds to a study, 2 different studies from our commercial corridors. And one of the things that you have to remember is that we didn't have a movie theater. We used to have plenty of movie theaters along Broadway, but when Broadway burnt down in the 70s,
Commodore.
yes, we had only the Commodore, and then that
Yeah.
closed, right?
Yeah.
2000. And so these studies were the opportunity to showcase where our needs were through community input, professional, urban planning report published, and it layered what would be the different recommendations. And I would take that and run with it, right? Now we have a list of things to do. And one of the things that we pointed to was the fact that we didn't have enough supermarkets in the area.
Mm-hmm.
To get, believe it or not, Trader Joe's. Trader Joe, when I went to them, said we didn't have the demographics. And when you hear over and over again, all these retail space utilization partners tell you that you don't have the demographics, it's unnerving, right? And fast forward, we had the 2005 rezoning that rezoned 174 blocks of land so that we were able to plan comprehensively open space, manufacturing, industrial, commercial, residential, affordable, Kent Avenue. That's right, Jason. Being able to have a blank canvas and unleashing the possibilities. It's not necessarily something that we can say was 100% perfect, right, Katari? Because what we know is there's a lot of condos, but with it, a lot of affordable housing that people are not aware of. We also got a lot of parks, and the jewel, we brought back McCarran Pool, three times the size of an Olympic football field.
Yes.
This thing is massive and closed since the 70s, and we were able to bring it back because of that rezoning.
Yeah.
There's so much more now. We only have 10 more minutes.
Yeah. Jason said Domino Park. Yeah, actually, Domino Park is beautiful.
Art, that's right.
It's so
Domino Park,
beautiful.
and the sign, we still preserved it. People were bashing online, haters will always be haters.
Of course.
The sign is important to me. To be able to preserve that sign means that we still have a remnant of what that used to be, and respecting the history and the people that worked at Domino Sugar that fed hundreds of thousands of families.
Yes.
That factory till the day it shut down. And I was on those picket lines not to shut down, right? So we really tend to err on the side of forgetfulness when we're not seeing the visual effects of what was the history there.
Yeah. I mean, we're getting questions coming in. We may not be able to get to all of them, but these are all great questions. Any plans to return to politics in the future?
So that day came and went. That ran for lieutenant governor in 2022. I was very concerned for my state. You have to remember, in the 50s, we had 45 congressional districts. Today, we have half of that. That means we're losing population at a rate that is incomprehensible, right? And when you start losing people, you start losing what is institutions, right? Less schools, less funding, less services, right? Everything is tied together. People don't take the time to understand this. And I felt compelled to be able to, I received an invitation to say yes to this opportunity. Going back to feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now we're talking about statewide campaigning. I got to see in 4 months what our state is made up of. And if you have not traveled beyond Westchester, I encourage you all to do so. The vast land of agriculture we have in this state is amazing. To be able to go visit Niagara Falls on the New York side and comparing it to the Canadian side, the history that it took to get to where we are today for that. The fact that we have, all of upstate New York is, off the grid. It depends on hydro electricity. I don't know how many of you are interested in any of that, but it's fascinating, right? That we have, you know, a concentration of the worst fentanyl overdoses and deaths related to fentanyl overdoses in Sullivan County. You know, remote places that need access, that we don't have enough, we have zero Wi-Fi capacity in upstate New York.
Yeah.
Unheard in 2024. And so these are infrastructure needs. And so in 2022, when I was invited to run with Tom Swazi, today he got elected. Thank you, everyone in Mount Sinai who came out to vote in that district. We didn't say for who to vote. Katari and Sean were helpful in making sure that you received a notice, understanding that if you lived in that district, get yourself to the polls before 9 p.m. And so you made that difference possible. And so today, Tom Swazi won for the congressional district that he used to represent. You know, in 2022, he left that position to run for governor. Although it was not successful, we had an opportunity to be able to, thank you. We had an opportunity to be able to have what was an amazing run. People don't know this. For governor, there's a slot, and for lieutenant governor, there's a slot. We could have elected the first Latina elected to office statewide as lieutenant governor. It was two women running, Ana Maria Archila and myself, because the governor had her candidate who she was on a slate with, and unfortunately had gotten into trouble and couldn't run. Wow. And she needed to run without him, still on the ballot, but not actively campaigning, and jeopardize her win, or continue with a replacement which required election law. And Albany chose to support her run by replacing her candidate for lieutenant governor with a different person. Today, you know, you look back and you think about, were the people given the choice to be able to have what were two women running in the state of New York? People were unaware that they could have split their vote, one for the governor and one for whomever they wanted for lieutenant governor. In the machine, it'll show up as in a ticket, but it wasn't a ticket. Just those small details count.
It's important. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so we're at 12:53, so I'm going to take another question. The questions keep coming in. This is so great. Who is your role model as a woman leader today?
I think back, first of all, I know this sounds so cliche, but my mother, she's an incredible force. She's at best 4'9". And when she walked into a room and I had to be her translator and she would be nudging me, tell them, you know, didn't matter right or wrong. In her heart and her mind, they needed to be told, right? And correct the facts. You know, we grew up poor, but it didn't feel like we were poor. I only knew we were poor because we received services, right?
Right.
Your Section 8, we were being evicted. When she had to go to court for 7 straight years, fighting to keep her apartment so that her 3 little girls wouldn't be in the street, and going into court and having to translate on her behalf, right? Like, that built me to be the advocate I was, because I saw her, the advocate, the primary advocate. And talk about not taking no for an answer. My goodness. And then you have, she's amazing. And then you have, you know, and she came here single, speaking no English, in the time of a civil war, after the dictatorship was over in Dominican Republic, right? And so for me, there's nothing more brave and courageous than my mom. So when I'm feeling like I have no confidence, I just remember her.
Yeah. Just
Then you have people like Shirley Chisholm, right? She was the first female in the Democratic Party to nominate herself as president, right? You know, she had gusto, right? Like the nerve you have to do that. She represented our area, you know. Those are the shoulders that as women we stand on, and whose legacy we have to continue to tell the next generation. You know, she built what was the war on poverty. That's where funding comes from. She was the one who built what was, you know, this pre-K Head Start programming for young children, because she was a teacher by profession. Remember what I said, you don't have to study political science to be in politics.
Right.
You bring your full self when you work outside of politics to be able to make changes in the areas that need it most.
Right. We have to be the impact.
Mm-hmm.
We bring the change just a little bit, like a mustard seed, just like the mustard seed.
That's all it takes.
We'll make the change. Exactly.
Iris, that's resilience.
Yes.
Love.
Iris said, thank you, Mom. Yes. We have to thank our mamas. One way or another, you know, they planted a seed in us and we took it and we ran with it, right? And that's very important that we acknowledge, you know, the impact that they made in our lives. Not just in, you know, the Women's History Month, but every day, right? It's just not a specific month. It's every single day. You know, those that still have their mom, you know, a phone call, always make sure, like you said, check up, you know, make sure they're good, because we owe it to them. Owe it to them. And so, you know, with that being said, I want to thank you very, very much for, you know, accepting the invitation, for this conversation. I've learned so much more from you, Diana. Very motivated, very empowering. And thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm pretty sure that everybody that's watching enjoyed this conversation. I do want to give a special thanks to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Also the Heritage of Latinx Alliance members and committee, as well as Mount Sinai Health System, for their continuous support of on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? We could have not done it without you guys. I hope you guys enjoy. Stay tuned for the next event and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
See you soon. Thank you,
Have a great day, everyone. Yes, we'll keep in touch, Diana. Thank you.